going through some of those keys to gaming because it has been so essential. But to see Gary switch it up and bring a Flygon instead.
No way!
Yep, he's gone for the Flygon, something he's a very big fan of. You know,
Flygon, I think, is one of those Pokemon that a lot of people are a fan of, but just never really has been able to be competitive.
Well, he's found a kind of unique use for it.
Really?
In replacing the Garchomp and doing things slightly differently. I'm very curious to see if it gets the same value as something like a Garchomp will. But he's going up against Cesar, and he's definitely got an interesting team. It is kind of a little bit more standard, I'd argue, but there's definitely some adaptations within there that I think could make or break this game for him.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that looking at his Pokemon that he's bringing in, we're seeing a lot of Pokemon that I think have been used throughout the tournament. You know, Arcanine, Garchomp, there's a Celesteela on there, there's a Snorlax, and those are just Pokemon that right now in this metagame are very consistent in their results. And, you know, I've seen this sort of trade-off. Some people I think are very creative team builders. They like to look for strategies that may allow them, you know, to have a bit of an advantage when it comes to team preview. Other people just, you know, pick the Pokemon that have consistent results and rely on their ability to just be able to make good plays in the moment to sort of give them that edge. So we'll have to see how Cesar kind of makes this team work out for him.
Well, I'll be very interested to see actually how Gary's team matches up against this. I think if you're looking at the two and trying to kind of define them, Gary has the non-standard team, while Cesar has the much more standard team. And you'd like to think, he's made top cut with it, that Gary has probably prepared a little bit more for these kind of standard matchups. These are the kind of teams he was expecting to see, and those are the ones that he was actually able to just get in line and know that he can beat. He's definitely going to have answers to all of these, you know, standard-ish, I guess, Pokemon. But at the same time, you know, if there's something on there that's a little bit different, maybe something Cesar uses to catch him off guard, then he's going to be in trouble. I think there's a number of interesting matchups with this team. It looks like Gary's just going to have to show off all his tricks immediately.
And that could put him at his disadvantage. I think we saw that a little bit back yesterday, where, you know, game one of the trainers would sort of reveal all of their tricks. You know, oh, I have this Z move on this Pokemon. Oh, I have this tech for this situation. And then going into games 2 and potentially game 3, their opponent just, since they know everything, they're really able to make those reads, make those plays, and ultimately come out on top.
Yeah, that's super important, is the information game. And when you play against a team like Gary's, the kind of problem you face is that you want to learn as much about it as soon as possible. But when you do that, you know, if he reveals too much, it might make it a little bit easier to play against. But with a team like Gary's and a player like Gary as well, he knows there's certain things that need to be conserved. And in some cases, the information game doesn't really end up mattering. Because even though you know what's coming, you don't actually have an answer to it. You just don't have a response to it overall.
I don't know. I find that kind of hard to believe. I mean, I think we've seen a couple matches where someone just has had no response for, you know, sort of the Pokemon that have been brought, but to have no response to an entire team, that would certainly be an indication of Gary, you know, maybe finding the quote-unquote play for internationals that a lot of trainers like to talk about going into a tournament like this.
The other interesting thing he has in this team, we've touched on the Flygon, but you know, people who have gone and scurried away and looked up this team on the QR code will see that it features the Murkrow as well. And the Murkrow is something that's very interesting. It's one of those Prankster Pokemon. Prankster took some changes coming into Sun Moon, of course. It doesn't affect Dark types anymore, and there is, of course, the threat of Tapu Lele to ignore those moves, because, of course, they are priority, and that's one of the benefits of the Psychic Terrain. So it kind of became a little bit harder to use Prankster, and those common Prankster users aren't so common. You don't even see much of the Whimsicott, which has seen a little bit of play, but not too much. And there was definitely a point where Dark types were very prevalent. The Muck, with the Dark typing with the new Alolan form, was one of those things you always wanted to catch with, you know, something from the Prankster. But overall, it was a little bit harder to get that reliably, so I think it kind of works out now. While we see Tapu Lele on the downswing, and we do see also much fewer amounts of Muck, now may be the time to get your Prankster users out.
So what I'm hearing is you think Murkrow is the play for internationals.
Well, we joke about this, and I had some conversations. I was talking to some players before the tournament began, and I actually theoried out with them. You know, they talked to me about it as well. A lot of Murkrow. It's got this very wide moveset of supporting moves. It's very important. Now, the biggest thing is going to be to make sure that it stays on the field. Obviously, if you're using Prankster, you're trying to support your team, and the big thing with that is that you need to stay around to throw out those supportive moves. So when you do that, you don't want to be taking big damage and getting readily knocked out. And with Tapu Koko on nearly every single team, it's not going to be easy for this Murkrow to do it over and over again. Of course, Murkrow carrying the Eviolite, I think, is just going to be a little bit wiser, just because, it needs to get some bulk, and that's why he doesn't have something like a Porygon 2 on his team. But the Murkrow has so many good options that you need more than 4 move slots to run the Murkrow effectively, and it's which 4 he brings will either, I think, win him or lose him the matchup if he decides that Murkrow is something he needs to bring in this.
All right, well, as these trainers get ready to hop into team preview, let's break down the matchup more closely. Gary will be on the left-hand side of your screen, and he is running Flygon, Nihilego, Pheromosa, Arcanine, Murkrow, and Kartana versus Cesar's team of Arcanine, Garchomp, Celesteela, Tapu Koko, Snorlax, and Mimikyu.
Well, definitely more standard from Cesar. We see the way that it plays out. The Snorlax and Mimikyu combination, very, very effective together. Garchomp, Arcanine, Tapu Koko, probably the staples of the format. And Celesteela, something a lot of people have been splashing in because they realize that it's a very good time to start bringing it. Gary's team, of course, much different, not always the standard thing. The Nihilego has been, probably lower on the usage statistics. Pheromosa only came to the fore in the last couple of weeks, I think, and particularly after the Madison Regional Championships, which was the last North American Regional Championships there. The Murkrow that he's so fond of, along with his Flygon. And then he has to round it out with something a little bit more standard, the Kartana and Arcanine. We just can't get away from Arcanine. It's such a good Pokemon this year.
Yeah, Arcanine could fill a supportive role on his team with moves like Will-O-Wisp and Snarl. It could fill a more offensive role. As we saw yesterday, we saw, I think, a couple Arcanine with that Inferno Overdrive Z move on it. Or it could just, keep swapping in and out of the field, intimidating the Pokemon on Caesar's side of the field, possibly counteracting a Belly Drum or a Curse from that Snorlax.
It takes a lot.
It's such a good Pokemon.
It takes a lot to do a Belly Drum. Actually, we talk a lot about Arcanine, and a lot of people say that it's on every team and it's not really well used. But I'd be curious to see, how many people are actually picking up on the Fiery MZ. It does have Inferno Overdrive. Definitely would be interested to see if it picks it up with the Z Sunny Day. We saw actually a player bring that out. Wasn't any use, he just kind of showed off that it had it. Getting the Sunset up to do more damage to your Flare Blitz and boosting your speed, that's really, really good for something like an Arcanine, which I think struggles a little bit to get all of its stats as high as it needs.
These trainers are ready to go into game one. Again, this is Gary versus Cesar. Whoever wins this round will just be one round closer to making it to Top Cut, making it to tomorrow, and possibly winning this tournament. Cesar sending out his Celesteela and Garchomp as a lead. Gary sending out that Nihilego and Arcanine.
I rather enjoy this lead from Gary. I think Nihilego is one of those things that a lot of people have been bringing right up in the front of their team. Because it's got very, very good coverage, I'd be curious to see if it's carrying, something to hit the Garchomp super effectively. Celesteela's a bit difficult because Power Gem is only the neutral hit because of that steel typing. But, it's still very significant damage, and the Arcanine getting the Intimidate down really helps out against that Garchomp. Of course, you don't want to be taking an Earthquake on this side, maybe forcing at least one switch from Gary. But if he feels good about his use of the Nihilego, then maybe that's something he's going to look to just try and deal with the Garchomp. We saw a couple of them yesterday, packing that hidden power of the Ice variety to guarantee the knockout. Maybe a combination of something with the Nihilego and a little bit more from the Arcanine could deal with it. He's going to have to try and get through this Intimidate, though.
Arcanine out on the field for Cesar, intimidating the Arcanine on Gary's side of the field. Garchomp protecting itself this turn, trying to get a feel for what that Nihilego is going to do, whether or not it has that Hidden Power Ice. Extreme speed from the Arcanine, Hidden Power on the Nihilego into that Garchomp. I think it's safe to assume that the Nihilego does have it.
Yeah, and a very smart play there from Cesar to basically try and scout out that turn. Not all Nihilego are carrying that hidden power. Some of them have been giving it up for other moves, some Acid Spray, some Trick Room. But overall, it's one of those things you need to scout for. And to do it turn one of game one is actually the best time to do it. So that's a very smart play. He gets an Intimidate down on Gary's Arcanine, so it's not quite as threatening. And now the onus is on Gary to start trying to make a read. If Garchomp stays in, he needs to go for that double attack on it again. But if he thinks it's going to switch out, he needs to capitalize on that turn and really go for something. With the fastest Pokemon on the field in the Nihilego, I think he's definitely in a position where he's somewhat in the driving seat, but he needs to make the right calls with it. If he does decide that he needs to attack, needs to go for the right slot, or he can just switch it out and show off more of his team.
Murkrow takes the field in place of that Nihilego. Garchomp leaving the field as well. Celesteela returning in its place. Maybe not worried about getting an attack from the Arcanine into that slot. Arcanine on Cesar's side of the field protecting itself, and Arcanine uses Will-O-Wisp, but Celesteela is able to dodge it.
Oh, that's a bad miss, because wearing down Celesteela with the Will-O-Wisp definitely helps out. It's one of those things that you just need to kind of mitigate that slow and steady recovery that Celesteela picks up. It's not nice that he missed that, and I think a very smart play to go for Will-O-Wisp, because it's one of those moves, as we were talking about yesterday actually, covering your bases. If you know something's coming in, you want to at least do something to it. You know, it's not like you want to throw a Thunderbolt at everything when there's a potential Garchomp switch in. So if Garchomp stays in, then he gets caught, of course, by the Will-O-Wisp. If not, you know, he could end up in a bit of a problem.
Tapu Koko taking the field for that Celesteela, not as worried about getting burned by the Will-O-Wisp from the Arcanine. Arcanine, though, no Will-O-Wisp, instead using Flare Blitz to crash into the Tapu Koko and get some damage down on it, doing about half, taking some damage in recoil. Cesar's Arcanine going for a Flare Blitz as well, attacking the Murkrow. Not quite knocking it out, but definitely putting it in range for next turn. Murkrow firing back a Foul Play into the Tapu Koko, not going to do a lot of damage at all.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those moves where he definitely tried to cover his bases. He thought about the Arcanine's, the Garchomp switching to deal with the Arcanine's Flare Blitz, switching him for that Celesteela. He didn't think about the Tapu Koko because that was the unrevealed Pokemon. If Celesteela had stayed in, the Flare Blitz would have knocked it out. If Garchomp came in, then of course the Foul Play from Murkrow would have done a lot. But with those kind of switches in mind, I would have been interested to see Gary try and set something up with this Murkrow. Of course, it is still able to do it. It does still have Prankster, so it can guarantee one of its supportive moves, its likely Foul Play, is going to be its only attacking option. But one of those supportive moves could be brought into play before anything happens. And I think whatever it does, it needs something to kind of try and deal with this Tapu Koko.
Arcanine on Gary's side of the field switching out, and Nihilego going to take its place. Nihilego happy to threaten that Arcanine and that Tapu Koko moving forwards. Arcanine on Cesar's side of the field going for a Protect this turn as Murkrow sets up Tailwind to ensure that the Pokemon on Gary's side of the field might be faster, and Tapu Koko revealing that it's brought Discharge of all moves, going to connect with the Nihilego and the Murkrow and knock the Murkrow out.
Well, Discharge is a very interesting move on Tapu Koko because it's not something we see very often, but it did a whole lot of damage. That Nihilego has really good special defense naturally, and to see it take that much damage must be a little bit scary for Gary. I think Murkrow did a good job, of course, getting that Tailwind in play before it got knocked out, and that was something important. That's why Prankster is such a useful ability. But this now puts us in a very interesting position, because with the Tailwind up, both of these Ultra Beasts on the field from Gary's side could really get the ball rolling. Kartana could go for some Leaf Blades, Nihilego could start with some Power Gems, you know, and even if you try and make calls, there's definitely openings for you to just knock things out regardless of what comes in. The next turn, you're still going to be able to do a lot of damage. So I think Cesar really needs to find an opportunity to try and wear down this Tailwind. Once he can get through the Tailwind, then his Tapu Koko is going to be in a fantastic position to do a little more work. Tapu
Koko switching out, not wanting to get knocked out potentially by that Nihilego or the Kartana this turn. Celesteela taking the field in its place. Cesar switching out both of his Pokemon, so a risky play here. He's not going to be able to attack any of the Pokemon on Gary's side of the field, and Kartana happy to take advantage of that fact, using Sword Stance to boost its attack by 2 stages. Nihilego with the Power Gem will connect with the Garchomp. Doesn't do a lot of damage, but that Sword Stance, such an amazing read by Gary.
Yes, it's one of those things where he does find an opportunity to set up Sword Stance, and not everyone manages to do that on Kartana. He doesn't even need to get Beast Boost before he can start taking knockouts. I know, of course, that Leaf Blade will be getting a knockout on Garchomp with this, and then you have to look at, can he deal with a Celesteela? These kind of Kartanas are always bringing the Sacred Sword, and would it be enough, depending, of course, on how Cesar has trained this Celesteela, to go for that knockout? He could also help himself out with the Nihilego, because that Garchomp on Cesar's side of the field is going to have to be scared, or at least respect the potential Hidden Power Ice in this instance.
The Hidden Power Ice and the Leaf Blade, really, Garchomp, its only hope to stick around for another turn would be Cesar having to switch it out or go for a Protect, which is what we see, but Gary looks to be excited about that. Celesteela using Protect as well. So Cesar, using this turn to stall out Tailwind. Sacred Sword not going to connect with that. Celesteela Power Gem also not going to connect. So a great prediction by Gary there. Cesar, though, just playing it super safe, wants to get rid of this Tailwind as quickly as possible.
Yeah, but he's still got another turn of it to get through. That's definitely going to be a tough sell for him. The Kartana capitalizing on that sword stance. We see that he does go for the Sacred Sword into what is the Celesteela, and he must be confident he's going to get the knockout. We saw Gary look very, very happy, of course, after the Garchomp Protect, because he didn't expend any of his time trying to attack it that turn. Celesteela also protected, so it didn't really work out for him, but at least he's making the right call in part that Garchomp is going to be protecting. That's something that I was definitely interested to see him, go for. There's not going to be any protects this time, though. This turn could be massive.
Sacred Sword into that Celesteela. Nihilego with the Hidden Power Ice into that Garchomp for the knockout. Celesteela here could use Leech Seed on that Nihilego, could try and use Heavy Slam to get a knockout, but first Nihilego gets that Beast Boost in its special attack stat and takes some recoil damage from the Life Orb. Celesteela revealing it has Flamethrower, trying to burn that Kartana, but Kartana holds on with its Focus Sash for this turn.
Yeah, Kartana just clinging on is going to be a bit of a bother for Cesar here. The curious thing, though, is the Tailwind has petered out and the electricity disappears, so this would be a fantastic time, actually, to bring that Tapu Koko back in. You've got to respect that he stalled out the Tailwind almost expertly in this case. He does, of course, have Arcanine, which could start picking things up with extreme speed, but the Tapu Koko here could do really well. It will get its terrain up whenever it comes back into the field, and it would be able to capitalize on that. We saw it do a lot of damage to this Nihilego, and now Nihilego isn't going to be able to outspeed it without the Tailwind. The Murkrow has already gone down, and that's actually not in a position to try and deal with it. Once he loses one of these two Pokemon, Gary's going to have to bring in the Arcanine in the back. Yes, it will do with Celesteela, but it's still going to be having to take electric terrain boosted electric attacks from this Tapu Koko.
And there's also the Arcanine in the back of Cesar's party as well, which would be happy to come back out on the field as soon as that Arcanine on Gary's side makes an appearance and intimidate it, weaken its attack, and just make it that much harder for Gary to score the knockouts he would need to win the match.
It really would. I think the amount of damage that Nihilego took from this Tapu Koko before, it's going to come down very, very close. You'd see if it will be a secure knockout. Of course, Nihilego's been wearing itself down with these Life Orb recoil hits. But, with the Protect from Celesteela, there could be a very obvious move coming.
Celesteela protects. Tapu Koko goes for its second discharge of the game, going to knock out that Kartana and the Nihilego. So, unfortunately for Gary, it's down to just his Arcanine against all three of these Pokemon on Cesar's side of the field. Yeah,
very smart play there. Knew there was a double knockout, and not many people would discharge next to a Celesteela. But because of the way he played while he was in the Tailwind, he actually had a Protect available to him, or at least a guaranteed Protect, as soon as that ended. So Tapu Koko comes in when Tailwind ends, and he's able to just kind of set things up with this Celesteela. I think in this case, Arcanine's just not going to be able to do enough. It needs to start targeting things down, and whatever it does, it's going to have to go through Tapu Koko at least for a couple of turns. So Gary probably just looking to recuperate, figure out what he needs to do, and get things together for Game 2.
Discharge is such an interesting move on Tapu Koko. You don't see it that often. In situations like this, I think it works really well, but at the same time, you have to worry about, you always have to have Tapu Koko next to either a ground-type Pokemon or a Pokemon that can use Protect in order to safely use it. In this case, Cesar's switching out the Tapu Koko, which may be an indication of maybe what that Tapu Koko is holding. Since, again, Discharge is such a peculiar move, I would think that there would be some sort of strategic reason behind it on Cesar's team. Arcanine with that Flare Blitz into the Celesteela, but misses the knockout thanks to Cesar's Arcanine's Intimidate. Celesteela with the Leech Seed, it does connect with the Arcanine, so Celesteela happy to keep restoring its health while Cesar's Arcanine slowly whittles away Gary's Arcanine.
I think what we saw in that turn, most importantly, is the fact they continued to play it out. Gary did not go for a forfeit, which a number of players would have done. And he does get that information about the Tapu Koko. The fact Tapu Koko moved the turn after it had discharged the turn before, while it was still next to a Celesteela, definitely an indication of a potential choice item in Tapu Koko's case. It's often the specs. I think Scarf is exceptionally rare. But, overall, that's the kind of information Gary's going to need, because even though the damage calculations kind of give that away, it's a nice time to test and confirm that theory for himself.
Extreme speed into Arcanine on Gary's side of the field as Gary fires back a Flare Blitz into the Arcanine on Caesar's side of the field. Celesteela protecting that turn.
Yeah, Celesteela just keeping itself safe. These Arcanines just trying to kind of exchange blows a little bit. But overall, I don't think there's enough in the tank for Gary's Arcanine. Of course, he's trying to bring it down very, very low to activate this berry. It's one of those that's pretty easy to activate on Arcanine with the recoil in particular. The Figgy Berry, the berry of choice here. But Celesteela's still healing up, and Arcanine doesn't have a way to reuse that berry like some of the other Figgy Berry users. So to see that come out is very interesting. And again, playing out this game means that Caesar actually has more information for next time.
Yeah, playing out this game I think is working more in Caesar's favor with the Tapu Koko in the back, potentially with a choice item. The Electric Terrain still on the field now, maybe still around when Tapu Koko takes the field back again. Means that it's just going to do so much damage to that Arcanine, potentially knock it out in one hit at this point. Arcanine's health is getting lower and lower thanks to this Flamethrower, thanks to the extreme speed, and thanks to the Leech Seed that'll just keep sapping away.
This is definitely time for Gary to think as he goes into Game 2 and potentially Game 3. He's got to reconsider some of his options, maybe see if he can get a little bit more out that Murkrow. The Foul Play turn probably wasn't the best turn for him. Maybe there was something else he wanted to get out of it, because he was trying to make reads, and you've got to admire that play. When it doesn't work out, you've got to think in Game 2, can you get a little bit more out of those turns where you start to make predictions?
Yeah, poor Murkrow. It got Tailwind up and it was knocked out immediately after, which I think was really the best outcome for it. I know a lot of people, especially with Pokemon that may not have as much of an offensive ability, such as Murkrow, once you get Tailwind up, you don't want to waste a turn switching. Sometimes it's just best if it does get knocked out, but in his case, I think he needed that extra damage as well, and there was just no way for him to have both in that situation.
No, I think there needed to be a little bit more, but the one thing I did notice about the way Cesar played that game is actually how well he kind of worked through those Tailwind turns. He managed to stall them out very, very well. There was one turn where he made a double switch, then he had a double protect, then he only really got attacked one turn in Tailwind, where it was very, very difficult for him to respond. He didn't exactly lose out horrendously, and he still managed to come out on top, so maybe Gary needs to look away from the Tailwind a little bit and try and figure something else out that he can do with this team. The one interesting change I'd like to see from Cesar actually is the potential of bringing that Trick Room mode. Maybe he's a little bit scared because of potential taunts, but overall, you want to see if he's got those things in the tank. The one thing I'd definitely be curious to see is the Flygon in this matchup. How does it match up against a couple things? How does it do against that Garchomp? If that Garchomp doesn't have a Dragon-type move, could be in very, very good condition to try and deal with that, actually. How does it match up against, Tapu Koko and Arcanine? If it's got a Ground-type move, which it should do, then it's going to be in great shape. But, would it be any good in this matchup? I don't see why not. And I think Gary might be wanting to look to that in this match.
Well, it looks like these trainers are ready to go, having thought through their strategies throughout the tail end of Game 1, jumping straight into Game 2. Best of luck to both Gary and Cesar. Personally, I'd like to see a little bit more, I think, of Gary's sort of fast mode, if you will. That Pheromosa, I think, could be an interesting adjustment from him. Cesar, never mind. That's the Nihilego and the Flygon out on Gary's side of the field against the Arcanine and the Tapu Koko out on Cesar's side of the field.
Well, this is the perfect time for Flygon. The two Pokemon that it does really well against on Cesar's team are the Pokemon that he led with. Not only that, but the Nihilego is also in that same boat as well. It's in that exact same category. The Intimidate coming down is going to be a little bit of a nuisance for potentially a Flygon. They have that choice to either use special or physical attacks. Very comfortable using both. But overall, I think this lead works so much better for Gary. Nihilego can threaten the Arcanine with a Power Gem. Flygon can threaten the Tapu Koko with a Ground-type move. If there was a Ground-type move that hit both, something like, I don't know, Earthquake, if it's gone for those physical type attacks rather than the special Earth Power, then this would be a great time to do it. Of course, he would have to keep Nihilego safe, and his damage output would be limited by that Intimidate. But I think this turn could be decisive if Gary's made the right calls.
Arcanine switching out, Celesteela taking the field in its place. Cesar hoping to maybe use the Celesteela to avoid any ground-type move damage. Flygon protecting itself as Tapu Koko fires off a Volt Switch into that Nihilego. So this will give Cesar the opportunity to get that Tapu Koko off the field, potentially send the Arcanine back in, maybe get a second Intimidate off on that Flygon, or otherwise better prepare himself to take an attack from that Nihilego. In this case, Cesar sends out the Garchomp. Sludge Bomb from the Nihilego will connect with it, not going to do a lot of damage, and doesn't really poison it as well.
No, this is a kind of slower turn to see that one, shake out. Doesn't get all the things it needs. I don't think Gary's in bad shape at all, but, the Nihilego wasn't used optimally, and again, Gary probably wanted to start making those predictions to try and capitalize on some of these switches. And that's something I think you need to learn in Game 1, is how your opponent plays the game. Again, we see a double switch. Of course, one of them is the manual switch, and another one comes from the Volt switch. But a double switch overall from Cesar in this turn, Gary needs to be capitalizing on that. This isn't a new play for him to see from his opponent, so he needs to learn from Game 1 and try and push on like that.
Nihilego certainly could allow him to push on if that's the strategy he decides to go with. The Power Gem on the Celesteela, maybe the Hidden Power Ice on the Garchomp. First, though, Gary switching out that Flygon for the Arcanine to intimidate both the Garchomp and that Celesteela. Nihilego protecting itself this turn, not wanting to get knocked out maybe by that Garchomp if it decides to go for an Earthquake, which is exactly what the Garchomp does. Does not affect the Celesteela, will connect with the Arcanine, but thanks to the Intimidate, it only does about 50% of health in damage. Celesteela with the Leech Seed will connect with the Arcanine as well.
Oh, this is a really good turn actually for Cesar. What we saw Gary was trying to do there was actually match the Protect. So he thought Garchomp was going to Protect, so he just protected his own Nihilego to keep it safe from the Celesteela. But Cesar amped it up, really started to put the pressure on and turn the screw a little bit by getting a lot of damage down. Of course, Garchomp now has the option to protect this turn. The Arcanine came in and took a lot of damage from the combination of Earthquake and a turn of Leech Seed. And it's very, very interesting to see how Gary's going to come back from this. He feels like maybe a turn or two behind the pace, in that he's making switches that are getting punished in the same way he didn't punish Cesar's switches in that turn 1. This Garchomp Celesteela combination has been a little bit underrated this year, I'd argue. The free Earthquake next to Celesteela is great, but in this case, Celesteela covers one of the biggest counters to it from Gary's side, which is going to be that Nihilego. If Garchomp can keep itself safe for a turn with Protect, Celesteela lands a heavy slam and could deal with it very well.
Arcanine switching out, Flygon taking the field in its place. Flygon with that Levitate ability will not take any damage from moves such as Earthquake. Nihilego with the Power Gem into that Celesteela, losing some of its health thanks to the Life Orb hold item it has. Garchomp happy to use a second Earthquake here to attempt to knock out the Nihilego. Will it do enough damage? It indeed does, and Celesteela now free to attack that Flygon, maybe go for a second Leech Seed, depending on what Cesar thought would happen. In this case, predicts the switch and goes for the second Leech Seed.
Cesar feels very far ahead in this game now, just because in a couple of turns, he's just got himself these really, really nice little advantages that are so important. Like that turn, the mind game that he was playing and basically trying to make the prediction on in Gary's side of the field was, is Garchomp actually going to go for the Protect this turn? Again, it looks like he thought we were going to have the Protect come out from Garchomp, so he throws a Power Gem towards his Celesteela, and Celesteela just takes it very, very comfortably, gets the Leech Seed down, knowing, of course, that Flygon would probably be switching in, and that Arcanine would definitely be leaving to try and get an Intimidate for later. We do see Gary's last Pokemon in this matchup is going to be Pheromosa, and I don't know if this is the perfect time to bring it.
Pheromosa is a really interesting Pokemon. On paper, it could have an interesting matchup here. It does get access to moves like Ice Beam. A lot of people will run it with that Fightium Z, which could do a decent amount of damage to that Celesteela. But at the same time, Gary had that Arcanine in the back. I would think that sending out the Arcanine, maybe getting a second Intimidate on that Garchomp, and then hoping that Flygon maybe had some sort of Dragon-type move to knock out the Garchomp might have been a little more favorable here. Could be an indication of what moves he has on that Flygon. Maybe he doesn't have any Dragon-type moves. Cesar, though, switching in that Arcanine, getting the Intimidate of his own onto the Flygon and the Pheromosa. Pheromosa going to protect this turn, so we won't know if it's a physical or special attacker quite yet. Celesteela with the Protect as well, leaving Flygon to use Dragon Dance. So overall, Gary getting rid of the Intimidate, boosting Flygon's speed by 1 stage, but still has an uphill battle here.
Yeah, he really needs to mitigate those Intimidates, and it's so important to just make sure he's actually able to do significant damage every single time. Of course, Flygon does need to be a little bit careful. It's going to start losing health with this Leech Seed, and I think maybe Gary trying to just play it a little safer that turn, We did see him in Game 1 try and set up that sword stance and capitalize on it. In this game, Flygon's now got a very nice speed advantage, and it needs to push on with that and try and get some big knockouts, try and get some damage down, and hopefully Pheromosa can just start picking up big knockouts of its own. This is definitely the turn now. Everything's set up that he needs to start looking for knockouts. With the 2 Pokemon that Cesar has on the field right now, and actually the 2 Pokemon he has in the back, I don't know if those are going to be easy to get, because the way he has to think about it, he's always going to have to think about the switch in this matchup. That's what he's been playing against all the time. And with that in mind, you know, I'm very curious to see if he tries to make predictions or if he keeps trying to play it safe and just push on. It looks like it's going to be a little bit more of that safe play.
Pheromosa switching out, Arcanine coming back out on the field in its place to intimidate the opposing Arcanine and Celesteela. You know, Pheromosa probably one of the Pokemon on Gary's team left standing who can make those big plays, so whether or not that switch was a good play will be seen as Arcanine goes for a helping hand into the Celesteela. Flygon uses a second Dragon Dance to boost its attack by 1 stage, so it's at +1, and then its speed now +2. Heavy Slam from the Celesteela into the Flygon. Thanks to the helping hand, it does a little bit more damage, but it's not enough for a knockout.
No, it's not. And we see that another Dragon Dance comes out from Gary's Flygon to basically see if he can get his attack up a stage now. Try and, once he's mitigated Intimidate, actually try and get some boosts. He has a very significant speed advantage now over pretty much all of Cesar's team. Be interested to see if he now has the speed to outspeed that Tapu Koko with 2 Dragon Dances. Will definitely be bringing it right around that area. But, you know, he does need to get some damage down on these 2 Pokemon at the moment. They're both at full health. Gary not only has the Pokemon deficit, but certainly has the damage deficit in the way that he's been taking damage throughout this match. The Flygon and Arcanine, if they don't target the right things, if they maybe throw attacks into the Protect, are going to start falling short.
Yeah, and Flygon, you mentioned speed. It really has to outrun, I think, the Leech Seed more than anything right now. Gary, I doubt he's going to switch it out, given the fact that he's invested 2 turns now into boosting its stats, but he needs to be able to get those knockouts and tie up the score as quickly as possible before Leech Seed is just able to knock out the Flygon no matter what. Cesar realizing that all he really has to do is just protect himself for a few more turns to knock out that Flygon, goes for a Protect on the Celesteela. Flygon revealing that it has Rock Slide to target the Garchomp, doesn't do any damage even after the Dragon Dance boost. Flare Blitz into that protecting Celesteela from his Arcanine.
Well, showing the Rock Slide is very, very interesting because with the speed boost, he definitely puts himself in a position where what he could start doing is in fact just getting flinches. He's only actually going to have 1 more turn to get a potential flinch, and he's going to have to capitalize on it. I think this Flygon's going to get worn down so quickly. We've seen how much the Leech Seed added up. It's actually only been attacked once, I believe, by that Heavy Slam. And we just see the rest of the damage dealt being done by Leech Seed. Flygon spent a lot of time setting up 2 turns in this game, particularly when there's this much damage potential on Cesar's side, is absolutely essential. And it looks like Arcanine is going to just try and wait and finish it up on its own.
Arcanine protecting itself, but Gary showing off a Z move. That Flygon has Groundium Z, going to be going for a Tectonic Rage to target something on Cesar's side of the field, but Gary targets the Celesteela, possibly predicting a switch there. So no Z move damage from that Flygon. Earthquake from the Garchomp won't connect with any of the Pokemon on the field. Flamethrower from Celesteela connects with the Flygon and is enough damage to knock it out.
Well, it's rather important actually that Celesteela does take that knockout, because now it gets to activate the Beast Boost. It gets a boost in defense, which means handling this Arcanine is going to be even easier. The way that play works out is very, very interesting. The way Gary revealed, of course, the Rock Slide the turn before, looked like the play for him was going to be Rock Slide, followed up by a Flare Blitz from the Arcanine. So what he looked for there, for those who are a little bit confused as to why he threw his Z move into something that he couldn't hit at all, was that he'd switch something in that could take the Rock Slide and the potential Flare Blitz, or at least bring it close. In this case, it's likely going to be something like his Arcanine, but then he doesn't get it. The Celesteela just stays in, because even if he trades for that, you know, he knows that he's going to be able to deal with it. And, you know, he still had the opportunity to just not get knocked out if there wasn't enough damage at all.
Garchomp switching out, Arcanine taking the field in its place, further intimidating the Arcanine on Gary's side of the field and further reducing the odds that a Flare Blitz from that Arcanine will be able to knock out that Celesteela. Pheromosa with the Ice Beam connects with the Arcanine, hardly does any damage at all. Arcanine with the Flare Blitz into the Celesteela. It's not going to be enough for a knockout, barring a critical hit of some sort, not going to get it. Taking a lot of damage in recoil and eating that berry, that Figgy Berry, to bring back its health, but it's too little too late. Celesteela happy to use Flamethrower now to try and knock out that Pheromosa. Not the most defensive Pokemon, is able to hold on with 4 HP, but again, too little too late.
Yeah, alarming to see Pheromosa actually take that hit without getting knocked out easily. But, you know, we see the benefit of a defensive Beast Boost, actually. That Flare Blitz just did so little damage to Celesteela. I mean, it did, of course, some, but just not enough. I think a lot more people, with the prevalence of Arcanine, have looked towards the bold and very physically defensive Celesteela. It's certainly an adaptation that has come into this game because there are better answers, of course, to the Tapu Koko than we've seen in the earlier part of the metagame, where we did see some very interesting kind of speed control needed to be done. Deal with Tapu Koko and then bring your Celesteela in it and win the game as slowly as you like. It's not really the speed of the Pokemon, but the way the game was being played, and the pacing, rather, was very, very interesting, particularly towards the end of games. Definitely slowed down a lot. So I think the Celesteela is going to be very, very important, particularly for our players in Cut today. And probably going into tomorrow, we're going to have some people who, when their tournament life is on the line, will gladly go to that Celesteela option and grind it out. Even though it wasn't doing too much damage outright, the Leech Seed was very, very important there. The way it was just posing a threat was so, so important for Cesar.
Those turns really add up. I think a lot of trainers think, oh, you know, Leech Seed, it only takes, you know, a little bit of my health every turn. I don't need to worry about it. It's more advantageous for me to keep my Pokemon out on the field and try and do damage while this Celesteela just hangs around. You know, I'll deal with it later almost, but it's such a dangerous assumption to make. Celesteela, you know, with the combination of leftovers, with Leech Seed and Protect, it just is happy to sit around pretty much forever.
Yeah, you really can't afford to leave it on the field. If it gets those Leech Seeds in place, it's a nightmare to deal with when it actually has 2 Leech Seeds, because it's recovering from both of your opponent's Pokemon at once, and it's just regaining so much health. I think a lot of people have been optimizing it to make sure it recovers as much health every single turn as possible. It also has, you know, some very nice offensive options outside of that. The Heavy Slam, because Celesteela is such a naturally heavy Pokemon, it's based on the difference in weight, that it does a lot of damage, even on neutral hits. That's really important. And that tech move, you know, we've seen, I believe it was Barris yesterday, running Air Slash on his Celesteela to benefit from the same type of attack bonus. And, of course, Kartana's kind of been on the down low, I think, at this tournament compared to previous tournaments at the regional level, because people are bringing Celesteela and they're putting Flamethrower on it. It's so annoying if you're a Kartana. You fall short of the knockout, which you're definitely going to if we keep seeing these physically defensive Celesteela. And then you just get Flamethrowed in return. It's really not a fun time.
It really isn't. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You know, you mentioned speed control in terms of the pacing of the game. You know, I think we've talked a lot about speed control in terms of Choice Scarfs, Tailwinds, Trick Room, but, you know, the pacing of a game is really important to sort of monitor as well, and I don't think that's something that a lot of trainers think about, maybe outside of just throwing a Celesteela or Snorlax on their team and trying to keep their health up.
Well, I think the game has certainly slowed down a little bit at these international championships. You know, we've seen a number of teams back in the format, the last regionals we had here, the team that won was very, very aggressive and needed to take knockouts turn 1, 2, 3, and 4, basically, to win the game. But here, you know, a lot of people, there's a lot more switching, there's a few more mind games, especially when we have people whose tournaments hang in the balance. You know, we just saw some players came in with the X and 2 record, can probably afford a loss, but they don't want to be taking too many. You know, you really want to feel comfortable sticking around that X and 2. You know, I feel like Gary may be able to come back from it, but Cesar very, very wisely, you know, he's keeping that record up. He came in that lower portion of the bracket, and he's going to be one of those players to watch. And with his standard team, he played it very, very well.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about how Cesar played that team. I think we have him on standby for an interview, so Anna, take it away.
Thanks, guys. I'm backstage with Cesar. That must have been a pretty exciting win for you there at the end. How are you feeling?
Yes, I'm still excited. At the beginning, I was very scared, to be honest, but everything went good.
What made you scared at the beginning?
At the beginning, he had 3 Ultra Beasts, so I was scared either Nihilego or Cartana could be Scarf, so I was scared about it, so I had to look around the team. So fortunately, neither of them was Scarf.
Yeah, and going up against an opponent who has maybe a less than traditional team, something that's a little bit off the beaten path, how do you prepare to make sure that you're able to take whatever comes at you?
I try to take the more information I can on the game 1, so I can find out what will be the best way to fight against it. And of course, well, in this case, it was a lot of pressure because 3 Ultra Beasts, you can get a Beast Boot anytime, so you basically try to avoid it. To avoid the Beast Boost, and with Arcanine, Intimidate, Cartana.
And now you've been able to emerge victorious. How is your record as it stands right now?
It's 9-2.
And how does that feel?
Well, it's amazing, to be honest. Yes, I'm trying to aim for top 8, or whatever top is. So yes, it's great. I'm going good.
Yeah, our casters have mentioned that they feel like Latin America is a rising region right now, that there's a lot to prove. Do you feel like that's the case?
Yes. Well, I'm here to prove it. On round 10, I lost against Sebastian, so he's from Latin America as well. So yes, I'm pretty sure that we have good level, and I'm proud to be here.
Yeah, representing your region, is there anything you want to say to the people back home?
Yes, well, Mexico, let's go. Vamos, México. Saben que se puede. We can do it. And well, I'm glad that I'm with the one because we were 3 Mexicans and I'm the only one who made day 2. So
Felicitaciones, as they say.
yes. Gracias.
Well, gracias por la entrevista. Thank you very much and good luck in the rest of the tournament. Now it's time to go back to our casters.
Vamos Mexico indeed. Such an amazing game by Cesar. I'm so excited. He looked so happy during that interview.
He did, and this is something we talked about yesterday. People representing their country at this big tournament, they're really, really proud of their nation. And, you come with a group of 3, one of you makes it. They've probably put all their energy behind him to push on. He's in great shape. He's come through what is now round 11 of Swiss, and he's still on the X&2 record, so he's definitely pushing and in pole position to just stay around for that top 8. It depends on how everything shakes out with the rest of the tournament, which record is going to make the cut. But if you don't lose, you're probably in a better position to do well.
Yeah, buena suerte, Cesare. And, we're going to take a break. But during that break, we have 2 other streams going on right now. Twitch.tv/Pokemon, Twitch.tv/Pokemon TCG. Or you can go to Pokemon.com/live. Catch all of the trading card game action going on over there. Our sister game. And I hear there's a lot of really cool matches going on. I hear that Volcanion is a really cool Pokemon in the TCG right now.
Well, they've been having some really
out.
fun matches. I was talking to some of the guys doing the TCG, and they've been very excited about their tournament. I mean, it's not quite as good as ours.
No, of course not.
But overall, there's a lot more action. They're going to be streaming all day. We're going to be streaming all day. There's so much more tournament to play in both games before we get to Championship Sunday tomorrow.
All right, so check out those other streams, and we'll be back with more video games here in India.